Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times, and welcome to the second observance of the International Day to Protect Education from Attack, and today's conference, Protect Education for Sustainable Peace. This is a significant occasion because for children and young people in many parts of the world, September marks the beginning of the school year. It's a time of optimism, excitement, and possibility, but also in too many places of worry, fear, and dread. Last year, 2,700 students and educators around the world were injured and killed, many in aerial bombing and shelling. We come together because we believe in three things. We believe the best lever for change is education. We believe that for those communities that need that change the most, often they can't get it because of conflict. And third, we believe that one way to support that education in those communities endangered by conflict is to more clearly establish global norms against this kind of interference with education. Because we also know that these attacks on children and schools are a threat not only to those individuals or to their families, they're a threat to entire communities, to countries, to our collective future. We know that a well-educated population where education is equitable and accessible to all, especially to girls, is essential for building peaceful and prosperous societies. So today we're going to hear how global leaders, international organizations, academia, grassroots organizations, and young people themselves are uniting to stop attacks on education. I'd like to acknowledge Her Highness Sheikha Moza Bint Nasser, the Chairperson of Education Above All Foundation and the UN Sustainable Development Goal Advocate, for leading this important global initiative with the support of UN Secretary General António Guterres and many of our distinguished panelists. In our three panels, we'll discuss the urgent need for accountability. We'll hear why education is a prerequisite for building sustainable peace, and what we can do to safeguard education from attack. And one thing is clear, you can't do much if you don't have strong evidence. So today you're going to hear some exciting news for the first time about a project that Education Above All and its partners, UNESCO and Kobo Toolbox, have been working on. It's a state-of-the-art technology that allows us to collect and analyze data on attacks in real time. That'll give us the evidence that the international community needs to hold perpetrators of attacks on education accountable and to ensure justice for victims. Now, to frame the key issues here, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speakers, Madame Audrey Azoulay, the Director General of UNESCO, and Ms. Henrietta Fore, the Executive Director of UNICEF. Under Madame Azoulay, UNESCO works to build peace through protecting education and culture around the world. And under the guidance of Ms. Fore, UNICEF has been trying to safeguard the rights of children around the world, including their right to an education, despite the challenges we've seen posed by violence, by the COVID-19 pandemic, and other threats. So welcome, Ms. Azoulay and Ms. Fore. Ms. Azoulay, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this presentation. Mr. President, Your Highness, dear Secretary General, dear Henrietta, my sister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, 1 week ago in Zamfara State in Nigeria, 73 students were abducted by armed men. The following day, on another continent, a student was fatally shot at a high school in North Carolina. These tragedies follow more than 1,600 school attacks recorded in 26 countries over the past 2 years. And with each attack, lives are upended, students and teachers are forced to live in fear. And today, as you know, we're all closely looking at what's happening in Afghanistan, where the right to education is under threat for women and girls. But first and foremost, school attacks undermine this very fundamental right to education, which is the basis of all the other rights and which is inscribed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. These attacks threaten the teaching of freedom by attacking the freedom to teach. But school attacks also undermine the rights of children by putting them at greater risk of violence, of exploitation, and forced migration. Because it is precisely the role played by schools that is under attack. This capacity, to quote the philosopher Hannah Arendt, to make the transition possible somehow from the family to the world. And that's why these attacks on school are attacks on the future, on our common future, and on the possibility of peace. In response to these atrocities, we must reinforce the progress already made within the United Nations, but the international community also committed to this goal with the adoption of the Safe School Declaration in 2015, a declaration which has now been endorsed by 111 countries to date. But because it's a cause which is a universal one, we call on states to adopt it and to implement its guidelines. But we need to go further and to build on the tools of international law, which is a common language among nations, and because we know the power of global norms. The fourth international conference on this declaration, which is taking place in Nigeria next month, will be an opportunity to step up these efforts. And next week, I will be myself in Nigeria for the start of a new school year, because school safety must be at the top of our priority. I would like very warmly to thank Qatar and Her Highness Sheikha Moza Bint Nasser for granting us this opportunity to discuss these issues today, as well as the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack for its commitment in this field. I would also like to thank our partner, the Education Above All Foundation, with which UNESCO has enjoyed a long-standing and very fruitful cooperation. And on this International Day, I'm happy to announce that we are reinforcing this collaboration by launching this initiative, which you mentioned, Nicolas, to improve the monitoring and the collection of data on education in emergencies. Because we all of us are here today to share this same goal and to put it into action to defend education as a fundamental right and as a global common good. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Azoulay. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for the work that you and your colleagues do around the world to keep kids able to go to school. And now let me turn it over to Ms. Henrietta Fore, the Executive Director of UNICEF.
Thank you very much, Nick. It is great to see you. And our deep appreciation to Her Highness Sheikha Moza bin Nasser, to the Secretary General, and to our great partner, Audrey and UNESCO. I am joined today by many others who are at work on this issue of education and protecting education. But I particularly want to salute that this is our second International Day to protect education from attack. And our partners, the State of Qatar, Education Above All, the Special Representative for Children in Armed Conflict, and UNESCO, are co-organizing this important event so that we can highlight it for the world. But I also want to extend my warmest wishes to the young participants, our inspiring youth advocates. We have made significant strides in mobilizing awareness and support for our common goal to protect education from attack. Through the tireless work of so many here, an astonishing 111 states have now ratified the Safe Schools Declaration. And last September, the UN Security Council adopted a presidential statement urging member states to develop concrete national measures, including through legislation, to turn this ratification into practical action. By helping us to galvanize global action, the very existence of this day is also a critical milestone. These shared successes can help ensure that every child has access to quality learning and that children, young people, teachers, and educators who are dedicated to making their dreams a reality are all protected from harm. Yet, we still have a long way to go and to translate commitments into effective protection of education in armed conflict. Before COVID-19 disrupted learning for over 1 billion children, 125 million children were already out of school in countries affected by crisis and conflict. And last year, there were 535 verified attacks on schools. That represented a shocking increase in attacks of 17% over the 2019 figures. Parties to conflict must adhere to their obligations under the international humanitarian law and cease attacks on education. We must hold them to account when attacks occur. It is incumbent on all of us to turn resolutions and hard-won policy change into action. This is the only way to protect students and educators and the facilities that are vital to their safety and to their learning. The only real measure of success is fewer attacks in the classrooms of Kandahar and Hodeida and Mekelle and Gaza and Mozambique and everywhere else where education is threatened by war. We can achieve this by more states adopting the Safe Schools Declaration and all who have adopted it, enacting legislation and implementation measures to fully realize its requirements. And parties to conflict and those who support them abiding by the rules and ensuring their forces respect and protect education. And supporting the communities most at risk to implement their own self-protection measures, building on established good practice. We are fortunate to have a diversity of highly committed, inspiring, and experienced speakers on the 3 panels today. Thank you again for joining us and for your unwavering commitment to protect education from attack. I'm confident that together we can ensure quality learning for every child and build a better, brighter, and more peaceful future for children who are living through war. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you, Henrietta, and thank you for your commitment and that of your UNICEF colleagues to keeping children in school. I've seen UNICEF staff on the front lines in Congo, Chad, Sudan, South Sudan, Burkina Faso, Bangladesh, so many countries working, sometimes at risk to themselves, to make sure children can go. So please extend to all those frontline colleagues of yours our thanks and gratitude for their work. And now, as part of this International Day to Protect Education from Attack, here's a testament to the terrible human costs of those attacks. Let's watch this video.
Good morning, class. David?
Here.
Fahima?
Han.
Ivan?
Tot.
Jasmine? Jasmine?
Nandito po.
Maria?
Aki.
Zahir? Zahir? Zahir?
What a heart-wrenching video. And now let's begin our first panel. Our first panelist is Her Highness Sheikha Moza Bint Nasser, the Chairperson of Education Above All Foundation and a UN Sustainable Development Goals advocate, champion of education around the world. Your Highness, this is the second observance of the International Day to Protect Education from attack, and yet attacks on education continue around the world. So I guess my question to you is a pretty basic one. In very practical terms, what can this day actually achieve?
Thank you, Nick. But first, my warmest greetings to my friends and colleagues here today. Congratulations, António, on your second term, and Mr. Karim Khan on your appointment as Chief of the ICC. And I'm delighted to meet Your Excellency Mohamed Bazoum, President of Niger, and I look forward to working with you. Your Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman, thank you for the support of EAA and for being a strong advocate of education. I'm so pleased to continue working with ICRC, the EU, and UNESCO. As the Director General Azoulay mentioned, we are really pleased to launch EAA's new data project with UNESCO, which I hope it will help us toward our goal of ending attacks on education. I'm so grateful to all of you who work so hard for education, and I am especially happy to see youth represented on our panel. So back to you, Nick. Your question about what a day like today can achieve. Well, the International Day to Protect Education from Attack will not halt attacks on education any more than the International Day of Happiness can anguish or can end the anguish, or World Food Day, eliminate hunger. We hold an International Day to draw attention to the magnitude of an issue and to provide a rallying point, because there are millions of children who are no longer have a school as a result of conflict. Despite the pandemic and despite Secretary General's calls for a global ceasefire, the number of attacks on education increased by a third in 2020. In 1 year alone, there were nearly 2,400 attacks. The students and staff who are maimed and killed in these attacks, they aren't collateral damage. They're being deliberately targeted, attacked in cold blood, in the very spaces where they should be safe to learn and play. Let me repeat, deliberately targeted. And why? Why schools? Well, because schools are places where new generations study their language, learn their history, culture, and traditions, develop a sense of identity, confidence, and agency. The children in the video you just saw are not abstract ideas. They are real. These children who are co-opted in the military, forced to flee, orphaned, or enslaved, they have been ripped from both the education and cultural legacy that is their birthright. And yet, it seems they are invisible to the world, except for occasional media sensation. Images of child's body washed up on a beach, or the twisted wreckage of a school bus hit by an airstrike capture global attention, and suddenly everyone rallies to the cause. Then the shock fades, the news cycle rolls on, and the community is distracted by the next headline. Yet the problem remains. Aggressors seek not only to destroy the lives, but annihilate the very history of those they attack. When they bomb buildings, smash monuments, and uproot trees that form the traditional heart of societies, attackers strip those societies of their history, distort their present, and obliterate their future. Their culture memory ravage. The survivors who crawl from the wreckage are left with nothing. The generations traumatized by their experiences, their wants, visible and invisible, must find a foundation from which to rebuild. And education is that foundation, enabling them to recover from the trauma, to live with their wants, and to find hope. That is why education is an alternative to chaos. That is why education is classed as human right. Education is a powerful weapon against cultural annihilation. Those who attack education are criminals. Criminals who steal far more than reading, writings, and arithmetics. Such criminals should be held accountable. And yet, right now, they get away with murder. When perpetrators make a premeditated choice to destroy education, to erase culture, and to end any possibility of peace, they should answer for their actions. And much of the time, we know exactly who is behind this destruction. We monitor these attacks, collecting the data that establishes culpability. So I believe that with such strong evidence behind it, the international community should ensure that those responsible compensate the victims, bring them to account, to face the consequences, and pay for the damage they have done. So Nick, you asked me, what can this day achieve? In 2010, we worked together to pass the General Assembly resolution on the right to education in emergency situations. 10 years later, we came together again to institute the International Day to Protect Education from Attack. And still, in more than 70 countries, school buildings are damaged, razed, or used for military purposes. So we must become more vigilant, make visible, both the victims and the victimizers. Next, today is our rallying point. It is time to urge the international community to request the United Nations Security Council to take action and bring those who commit atrocities against education and what it represents to justice. So the ruthless victims of these 70+ countries know that we are committed to their peace and security. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what António and Mr. Khan think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheikh Moza, for your very blunt remarks about the degree to which these attacks represent criminal behavior, which has to have consequences. I'm a great fan of your leadership in trying to unite us to protect education. And the presence of our next speaker, the United Nations Secretary General, His Excellency, Mr. António Guterres, underscores the importance that the global community attaches to protecting education. Welcome, Mr. Secretary General.
Well, thank you very much, dear Nick, for your question, but especially for your permanent commitment to humanitarian causes. Allow me to start by thanking the State of Qatar and the Education Above All Foundation for your kind invitation. I also welcome the distinguished guests and representatives joining us at this important event. The global community needs to speak with one voice. Attacks on schools must stop. Schools must be places of learning, safety, and peace. Education provides knowledge and skills, but it transforms lives and drives development for people, for communities, and for societies. The problem is that year after year, this fundamental right comes under attack. Imagine being a child sitting in a classroom, eager to learn, or a teacher dedicated to shaping the minds of the next generation. Now imagine the horrors inflicted by conflict on learning. Schools being targeted or destroyed or used for military purposes. Children facing violence, exploitation, even recruitment to the fighting, simply because they go to school. Young women and girls completely denied the right to education, and students and teachers wondering if their place of learning will be next. Between 2015 and 2020, the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack collected over 13,000 reports of strikes on education or the military use of educational facilities worldwide. And this threat is not lessening, as the horrifying events in Afghanistan are showing us so starkly. These are not numbers on a page. These are thousands of individual lives and individual futures and the loss is incalculable. That is why we call on all countries who have not already done so to endorse the Safe Schools Declaration. Endorsed by 111 states so far, the declaration outlines concrete steps that governments can take to protect schools and learning. We urge member states to go beyond their commitments under international law and to put in place national policies and laws that protect schools and learners and that hold perpetrators accountable. In every country and jurisdiction, we need to make attacks on schools unacceptable and punished. And finally, we call for increased global support for the work of UNESCO and UNICEF, who are working around the clock to protect education, students, teachers, and schools in some of the most dangerous places around the world. While we have made great strides in recent years, we need to do more to protect the right to education for all. As Secretary General of the United Nations, I'm proud to stand with you in this important effort because when we protect education, we protect the future. And it is an enormous pleasure to join Sheikh Moza that has been doing so much in this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, and thank you for your emphasis on establishing not just lip service, but really translating that into accountability and into an actual halt on the ground of these attacks. That's just so important. And our next presenter is from the country of Niger, where many of those attacks have taken place. This is His Excellency, Mr. Mohamed Bazoum, the President of the Republic of Niger. He has demonstrated leadership on this question with the adoption of a presidential statement on the topic of protection of education in armed conflict. So, bienvenue, Monsieur le Président Bazoum.
Merci beaucoup. Son Altesse Royale, Sheikha Moza Bint Nasser, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général des Nations Unies, Mesdames et Messieurs. Je voudrais, à travers Son Altesse Royale, Sheikha Moza, féliciter vivement l'État du Qatar pour l'organisation de cet événement d'envergure. Je salue également l'engagement du Secrétaire Général des Nations Unies. Cette question de la protection de l'éducation contre les attaques est d'autant plus préoccupante que dans les pays touchés par la violence et l'insécurité, près de 75 millions d'enfants ont vu leur éducation perturbée par les conflits. Avec la pandémie de la COVID-19, l'éducation a été interrompue pour la quasi-totalité des enfants et jeunes du monde. Mon pays, le Niger, est résolument déterminé à renforcer la protection de l'éducation contre les attaques, notamment dans notre région, le Sahel, où, comme vous le savez, le nombre des écoles fermées du fait de la crise sécuritaire et des attaques contre les écoles perpétrées par les groupes terroristes a été multiplié par 6 depuis 2017, avec plus de 5 000 écoles fermées, perturbant l'éducation de plus de 700 000 enfants et privant plus de 20 000 enseignants de la possibilité d'exercer leur métier. Dans ce genre de conflit, les filles sont particulièrement vulnérables car elles ont 2 fois moins de chances d'être scolarisées que celles vivant dans les pays en paix. Elles sont également plus exposées au risque de ne pas continuer leur éducation avec la fermeture des écoles. Mesdames et messieurs, le Niger fait de la protection de l'éducation, notamment dans les zones touchées par les conflits, une priorité de son mandat au Conseil de sécurité. Lors de notre présidence du Conseil en septembre 2020, une déclaration présidentielle sur la protection des écoles contre les attaques a été adoptée. Renforcer le cadre normatif pour la protection de l'éducation facilitera la mise en place de politiques et de mécanismes de protection et de prévention plus efficaces. C'est pour cela que, conjointement avec la Norvège, nous œuvrons pour l'adoption d'une résolution du Conseil de sécurité, la première qui se focalisera principalement sur la protection de l'éducation dans les zones touchées par les conflits, l'insécurité et les crises humanitaires. Cette résolution viendra insuffler un nouvel élan politique à la coopération internationale pour la protection de l'éducation et la continuation de l'apprentissage. Mesdames et messieurs, le Niger appelle solennellement à des actions concrètes pour la protection de l'éducation. Si la pandémie actuelle a mis à rude épreuve notre capacité à pallier les graves violations que subissent les enfants en temps de conflits armés, elle nous rappelle également qu'un changement systémique à l'échelle mondiale, y compris dans nos efforts de protection de l'enfance, s'impose. La pandémie de la COVID-19 a mis en évidence la nécessité de fermer le gouffre d'inégalité d'accès à l'éducation numérique et digitale entre les pays afin de faciliter, quelles qu'en soient les circonstances, la continuation de l'apprentissage pour tous. Dans ce contexte, la mise en œuvre effective de la résolution 2565 du Conseil de sécurité afin de faciliter un accès équitable et abordable aux vaccins dans les situations de conflit armé, les situations post-conflit et les urgences humanitaires demeurent cruciales. En effet, au moment où plus de 70% des habitants de certains pays développés sont vaccinés, ce chiffre ne frôle que 2% pour les pays à faible revenu. Nous sommes confrontés ainsi à l'impérieuse responsabilité de répondre aux défis actuels, mais également de mettre en place des mesures résilientes permettant de préparer notre communauté mondiale à protéger davantage l'éducation dans un présent et futur marqué par la menace des changements climatiques. L'accroissement des déplacements forcés du fait du changement climatique est un risque immédiat pour l'accès à l'éducation, tout en déployant des efforts pour renforcer la résilience et la justice climatique. Il est primordial de diriger l'éducation en situation de crise en une priorité absolue. Selon les études, en 2021 seulement, plus de 4 millions de filles dans les pays en développement ont dû interrompre leur scolarité du fait d'événements liés au climat. Ce chiffre pourrait atteindre 12 millions d'ici 2025. Mesdames et messieurs, l'éducation est notre meilleure chance d'asseoir les bases d'une reprise post-pandémique résiliente et durable. Tous les acteurs, y compris le secteur privé, ont un rôle dans le renforcement des mécanismes de financement pérennes, efficaces et catalyseurs. Mon dernier point est un appel à une remobilisation de notre système multilatéral pour remettre davantage la question de la protection de l'éducation au cœur des priorités globales. La protection de l'éducation est une responsabilité collective que nous devons tous d'assumer. Il s'agit d'une condition essentielle pour l'atteinte des objectifs de développement durable, en particulier l'objectif numéro 4, mais également pour asseoir la paix et la sécurité auxquelles aspire la communauté internationale. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, President Bazoum, for all you were doing to make education a priority in Niger. And at the end of the day, this event today is not about us here. It's about those kids and those teachers in the field there. So please send to them our admiration for their courage and our determination to keep them safe. Joining us next is His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jassim Thani, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs from the state of Qatar. The state of Qatar continues to support education on a global scale, including girls' education, leading efforts to prioritize the protection of education from attack. So, Your Excellency, can you share with us something about Qatar's priorities for safeguarding education when it is in conflict environments?
Your Highness Sheikha Moza Bint Nasser, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by saying that the State of Qatar is deeply honored to host this important event to mark the second International Day to Protect Education from Attack. Over a year ago, the State of Qatar spearheaded the efforts that led to the adoption of the landmark resolution 74/275, establishing September 9 as the International Day to Protect Education from Attack. We did this because education is a core political and development priority for the State of Qatar. We deeply believe in education's transformative power. Therefore, it is of key importance that we ensure the continuation of education during armed conflict and to provide and facilitate international cooperation and assistance programs, working to prevent or respond to attacks on education. This is not an option, but an imperative. It is an imperative because education gives girls and boys hope, confidence, and dignity. It equips them with knowledge and skills to escape poverty. It saves lives and reduces the spread of preventable diseases and pandemics. Education plays a vital role in rebuilding conflict-affected communities as they transition to peace. By influencing people's attitude and behavior, education is a key channel for better mutual understanding, tolerance, and respect for each other and our planet. We all know this to be true, yet millions of children and youth are out of school due to living in or having fled an emergency or conflict. Furthermore, in recent years, there has been a significant increase of attacks on schools and their infrastructure, resulting in an alarming number of children denied access to quality education. What worries the state of Qatar the most is that many of the affected children and youth will be forgotten, and they might never resume their education. We must also prioritize the education of girls in conflict situations. When girls are not in school, the risk to their safety and dignity mounts significantly. Allow me to say a few words about the latest developments in Afghanistan. The state of Qatar is deeply concerned with children and youth access to education, and we are doing our utmost to support them. For instance, a group of 111 Afghan schoolgirls attending a special leadership school in Kabul, sponsored by the government of the state of Qatar, were able to fly out to Doha. Members of Afghanistan's famous girls robotic team are also in Qatar. They were flown out of Kabul to Doha with the assistance of the Qatari government. They will be given the chance to continue their education and robotic work. We are as well working continuously with our international partners to protect civilians in Afghanistan in the context of the current political situation in the country, including students and scholars, citizens of friendly countries, and journalists who are seeking to leave Afghanistan by providing safe passage to travel to Doha and beyond. To conclude my remarks, I would like to reaffirm that the state of Qatar spares no efforts to strengthening monitoring and reporting mechanisms, including investment in data collection and analysis, in order to ensure accountability for violations committed against children and teachers, as well as attacks against schools, and in contravention of international humanitarian law. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheikh Mohammed, for your international leadership on protecting education on behalf of Qatar, and also for your remarks about Afghanistan and your work there, including Qatar helping my colleagues at the New York Times leave the country. We're grateful, and I do hope that when Afghanistan has faded from the headlines, that the international community still ensures and works hard to keep girls in school, not only in Kabul, but around the country. I think that's going to be a challenge for Afghanistan and the international community. And now joining us is Mr. Karim Khan, the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. And I think this is a crucial perspective because, I think we've all been agreed for years that we need to stop these kinds of attacks. But there's a feeling, I think, and Sheikh Moza expressed it, that too often this is lip service that doesn't translate into actual accountability to stop criminals, to disincentivize those attacks, to spread the word that those who attack education will pay a price for it. And that is where the ICC comes in. So let me ask, given the rise in attacks on students in schools, Mr. Karim Khan, what steps and actions can and should international prosecutors working with local prosecutors take to end these attacks on education? And how can criminal accountability for attacks on education be strengthened and enforced?
Well, thank you so much, Nick. And can I start really by thanking the organizers, Her Highness Sheikha Moza bin Nasser, the organization, Education Above All, the State of Qatar, for the really very generous invitation to say a few words. I acknowledge, of course, and I'm really pleased that this event has attracted such widespread support. The Secretary General of the United Nations himself, the President of the Republic of Niger, and so many other dignitaries really shows that this is a need of the hour. This day is a testament to children, our future, our collective future, being denied hope and suffering, crying, and being harmed in myriad different ways. This day is one that should unite us, and I think really that's the underlying message of my few remarks today. For goodness sake, if we can't be united in relation to the need to protect children effectively, move beyond platitudes, move beyond resolutions, move beyond even normative principles to actually fulfill our collective societal responsibilities, which is that children are to be allowed to grow up, allowed to be educated in peace. We are failing not just our own individual and collective responsibilities, we're failing the future. When one passes one's gaze around the world and looks at this particular issue, we see so many different types of crime being committed. Not only the institutions, schools and colleges, primary, secondary and tertiary, not just teachers or professors, children, but also the parents that are encouraging their children to go to school. And the type of crimes can be dealt with in a number of ways. The SG, Sustainable Development Goal 6, the Incheon Principles Declaration, and the Rome Statute by way of Article 82B9 make it clear that it is a crime to deliberately target protected objects, including educational institutions. The crime of persecution as a crime against humanity can enter into the being a tool when children are being targeted or being prevented from being educated because of discriminatory grounds, including grounds of gender. And incitement to commit genocide or in other inchoate hate crimes can be effectively used. Because I think it's important to realize that the crime itself can take place in two distinct ways. The first is targeting, exploding suicide bombs, shooting people. But the other way is by hijacking education itself. In my last mandate as the first special advisor and head of the UN team investigating ISIS, we saw how education itself was stolen. We see the documents in Baghdad that have been seized from the battlefield of children being taught mathematics by counting the number of suicide vests or the numbers of Kalashnikovs, and you add them together to get the right answer. This really shows the scale and the immediacy of the problem. Individuals like Malala Yousafzai, who had their lives massively changed because of the right, their God-given right, their legal right to have education, is an example that should focus minds. Every child is extraordinary, but we shouldn't require our children to be superhuman in the manner that Malala was forced to be. So this requires us to step up. Unfortunately, when one looks around the world, whether it's Afghanistan or Mali or other locations, you see education being under attack. Very often in the name of ideology, which is a complete contortion. And I say it because of what we see in Afghanistan and elsewhere. The Prophet of Islam stated that a believer should seek knowledge, even if the believer has to go all the way to Cathay, to distant China. It doesn't talk about men seeking knowledge or women. It's not gendered. Any person is enjoined to seek knowledge. The Prophet said that somebody, a scholar, is even higher in virtue than a worshipper, like the moon is to the stars. Somebody who educates his daughter to read should attain paradise. I say this because this day, this event, and the Rome Statute principles really make no distinction based upon creed or religion or culture. It is the essential obligation of all of us to move forward. The Rome Statute system and the Office of the Prosecutor has looked significantly in relation to crimes against children. The Labanga case, the Ntaganda case, and the ongoing case have looked at the forcible recruitment of child soldiers. They've looked at sexual crimes and others. But the reality is we need to do more. We need to move beyond the law on the page and make a real difference in the area. I think that can be done in a number of ways. Events such as this is important, but we need to make sure that this issue and the harm that is caused is written on etched on our hearts every single day of the week, every day of the year. In this regard, it's important to bear in mind that the crimes of the Rome Statute can affect children, but if we stay united, can make a meaningful difference. And my real point is this: we have conflated for far too long crimes of sexual or gender-based violence with crimes against children. And in my view, at the ICC, we need to follow the UN system, in which we have Virginia Gambas focusing on crimes against children, as well as Pramila Patten on sexual and gender-based violence. If we conflate civilians and children in particular as part of the general population, we're not going to make the inroads that we need. I invite all states, including non-state parties, to find the common ground, including the rights against children, and come together. I would like to create a P5 level special senior legal advisor on children to make sure we do better, and also a P5 senior legal advisor on crimes against women and other gender crimes and sexual crimes. This issue of education is one of sovereignty. It's not simply the future in general terms. Sovereignty requires knowledge and an ability to make informed decisions. And if we focus ever increasingly on this issue, if we prioritize in terms of the responsibilities of my office, prioritize attacks on education, I think collectively we can move the dial to ensure that tomorrow is better than today. We should recall the powerful video that was shown. It's not theater. The kind of hardship is what many children are feeling, the fear they are suffering as we speak here and now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Prosecutor, for your blunt remarks. I entirely agree with your diagnosis of excessive complacency, and we will all be rooting for you as you work to translate, as you put it, the law from the page to making a difference in classrooms around the world. Thank you for your leadership on that. And few are more familiar with the impact of the kind of violations that you're talking about than the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC. Our next panelist is Mr. Peter Maurer, the president of the ICRC. And I've traveled with the ICRC and places like the Central African Republic. We visited schools where there was a sign that said it was a donation from a foreign aid organization, but all that was left was a shell. There were no students, no books, no nothing, because of these kinds of attacks. And the courage of your colleagues on the front lines, I find truly inspiring. So, Mr. Maurer, the ICRC is the guardian of international humanitarian law, which protects the continuity of education in a conflict zone. So what can the world do to ensure that access to education is safeguarded in reality and not just in international law?
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we mark the second International Day to protect education from attack, I congratulate Your Highness Sheikha Moza bint Nasser al-Misnet and the State of Qatar on your dedicated efforts to protect education. These efforts are sorely needed, for education remains a battleground, and it should not be. In our operations around the globe, the International Committee of the Red Cross sees that education is especially vulnerable to the shocks of conflict and violence. Fighting can destroy or damage facilities and make it unsafe for children to travel to school or attend class. School closures can be prolonged or become permanent. Sometimes, and it is shocking, schools, students, and educational personnel are the target of attacks. In protracted conflicts, entire generations can lose out on education due to economic hardship. This can increase exclusion and abuse for many, particularly girls. While the ICRC is not an education specialist, we know how to operate in conflict. We partner with others. For example, we are pleased to have signed an agreement with the Education Above All Foundation in Qatar to capitalize on our strength and increase our collective impact. Together with our partners, we work with communities and governments to mitigate the impact of conflict and violence on education systems. School communities are well positioned to implement protective measures, and we work with them to design local safety protocols, contingency plans, and policies. For example, in Brazil, the ICRC developed a digital platform and app so teachers can report security incidents in school in real time and request support. Enhancing their risk management capabilities has reduced the number of school closures in Rio de Janeiro by 46%, despite a 39% increase in shootings in the same area. This approach has now become public policy in many municipalities. In conflict-affected communities in Ukraine, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and elsewhere, our teams train children and education personnel on risk awareness and safer behavior, and provide psychological support to help them deal with stress and trauma. Protecting education also means ensuring that laws, policies, and military doctrine and training are in place to direct the behavior of weapons bearers. Today, I make 4 recommendations to protect education during conflict. 1. To make stronger efforts to keep schools open and safe during conflict or violence, including, where possible, those close to front lines. The ICRC is ready to work with states and others to facilitate access to education in hard-to-reach areas, leveraging our expertise in protection and assistance. 2. Parties to armed conflict and those who support them must work for better respect of international humanitarian law, protecting education from attack and facilitating its continuation. The ICRC welcomes the work of states to bring IHL home by adopting the necessary domestic law and practice to ensure weapons bearers respect schools as they fight. 3. To assist and empower communities and ministries of education to manage the consequences of conflict and violence. Often fear and lack of preparedness rather than a direct attack is the decisive factor in closing down schools. And 4, to analyze and respond to the systemic implications for education continuity that compound from individual attacks. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this International Day should be a strong rallying call for action. We must work not simply to help people survive, but to enable lives of dignity and opportunity. I thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for the work that you and your colleagues are doing on the ground in some of the world's most dangerous places. Truly, we're grateful for your thought leadership and your practical work. And now let's hear from His Excellency, Mr. Josep Borrell, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. the High Representative has sent us a video sharing the EU's vision to support, safeguard, and guarantee access to education in conflict areas. So let's hear from Mr. Borrell.
Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you to the co-organizers of this event, United Nations and Qatar. The topic of the event is timely. It couldn't be more timely. Protecting schools from attacks is central at a time that natural disasters, civil wars, and terrorist attacks are growing at an alarming rate. And the COVID-19 pandemic has still an impact on education, like with school closures and restrictions on movement of people. And after the events of the last week, with the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, there is yet another pressing and concrete case to be worried about. In Afghanistan, grounded fears of attacks on schools and banning of girls from education, all of us will have to work together to defend progress made in recent years. 3 million girls are at school now, and to protect schools, school children, and the whole education system in Afghanistan. The European Union has always been committed to the safety of children and the protection of schools. The European Union stays at the forefront of the international mobilization for education in emergencies, dedicating 10% of its humanitarian aid to support access, quality, and protection of education. Back in 2018, in our education in emergencies and protected crisis policy communication, we, the European Union, clearly underlined that schools must be safe havens and gave our support to the important work of the global coalition to protect education from attack, an initiative to promote and roll out the Safe School Declaration. Our commitment translates into projects on the ground. In Nigeria, for instance, a program supported by the European Union promotes access to safe, inclusive, and quality primary and secondary education for at least 80,000 children in more than 120 schools, targeting girls in particular. The EU has also launched the Building Resilience Education Opportunities in Fragile and Crisis-Affected Environment program to help children living in crisis-affected countries. This program provides quality education and safe learning to almost 200,000 displaced children in Congo, in Ethiopia, Niger, Somalia, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda. These and other programs have one overarching goal: support the right to education, a safe education for every girl and boy. We need to end attacks on education. We need to establish and defend schools as productive, protective spaces. At the same time, we are committed to continue to work on further enhancing coordination and building up a joint humanitarian development, peace. The European Union stays at the forefront of peace building and conflict prevention actions worldwide. To stop or prevent conflicts at an early stage, ladies and gentlemen, a global mobilization is needed to achieve a stronger and flourishing education systems worldwide. Because one thing is clear: education is key for a better world. It's the basis of the progress, the basis of equality. It's key to improve and strengthen the quality and the equality of our societies, and to promote human rights, gender equality, sustainable development, and fair economies. All of us are strongly convinced of that. That we are gathering here together. And I thank you a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Borrell, for your support and that of the member states of the EU to protect quality education for marginalized communities. Now, at the end of the day, this isn't about international officials. This is about kids in classrooms. So we are privileged now to hear from a 17-year-old student from one of the countries that has been gravely affected by conflict, and where many children, and maybe especially girls, have been impeded from getting the education they dream for because of these kinds of conflicts. I'd like to introduce Wendy Ahanda from South Sudan. Wendy, we're thrilled to have you with us today and to hear your message.
My name is Wendy Ahanda Macharchik. I am 17 years old. I'm a South Sudanese and I'm a child reporter with UNICEF. One of the major challenges that hinder access to education in my country will have to be armed violence. Education is a very important aspect because it helps to broaden your mind and develop life skills. It helps to improve one as a person, not only in the form of that you have to read and write, that's education. No, when you take education seriously and when education is protected, the children can benefit from it also in ways that they can help their community outside of reading and writing. I'm beyond grateful to be given the opportunity to ask from the world global leaders directly. We, the people of my generation, ask for our voices not to be only heard, but listened to. Because only we, the children and the youth, know the challenges that we face best. And it's only we who can help them find solutions designated to help us. Because sometimes you can help someone, but you're not actually helping them solve the problem. So that's why I ask the global leaders to always consider the opinions and the voices of the children and the youth. Lastly, we must begin to work towards changing and helping to protect our education. We must all we must all begin to work on this individually, starting from the communities, in order to make a global impact. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'll be beyond grateful to see and work towards change for a better and safer education system for all the children in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for joining us. We all wish you the very best for your country and for your own education itself. I'm sure you'll provide leadership for your country as well. Now, this morning's panelists have provided a compelling portrait of the challenges ahead, but also of the opportunities to make a difference. And I come back to the three principles I mentioned at the beginning, that the best lever for change we have around the world is education. It's the best lever for eradicating poverty, for addressing climate change, for reducing conflict. It goes back to the principle that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And secondly, the point has been made that where education is most needed, those are precisely the places where there are impediments to it in the form of conflict. And thirdly, that to bring about change, we have to not only give speeches, not only provide lip service, but actually achieve changes on the ground. And the point has been underscored that this is a matter of criminality, and that where there is criminal behavior, there need to be consequences and an end to impunity and real deterrence established. We need to provide that kind of legal accountability for criminal actions, including mechanisms for restitution to compensate individuals and institutions who are the victims. And that can only come through a coordinated, unified, global response. The statements of the global leaders today, I think, show this is not just a panel discussion, but a real demonstration of commitment. And as evidence of the urgency of this cause, we're fortunate to have some world leaders uniting their voices in a shared commitment to protect education from attack. Let's hear what they have to say.
The world we're building and leaving to posterity must become a safer and better place for the lives of generations of children and youth. Together, let us support the creation of such a future.
The right to safe education should be universal and without any boundary.
ونحن في فلسطين أحوج ما نكون لهذا اليوم العالمي ليكون اليوم العالمي لحماية الأطفال وحماية العملية التعليمية وحماية المدارس. Unite to protect.
Conflicts, natural disasters, and other inhuman circumstances keep millions of children out of school yearly, denying them the fundamental right to education.
Guatemala se suma al compromiso de garantizar a nuestros niños, niñas y adolescentes el derecho a recibir una educación en un espacio libre de cualquier tipo de violencia.
Violence and conflicts spreading all around the world continue to prevent young people from living, growing, and studying in peace and security. We need to reverse such a trend. Otherwise, there will be severe consequences for the future.
إننا نحتفل اليوم 9 سبتمبر باليوم الدولي لحماية التعليم من الهجمات بموجب قرار من الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة. هذا اليوم هو فرصة للمجتمع الدولي والدول الأعضاء والمجتمع المدني وغيرهم لتوجيه رسالة موحدة وواضحة بشأن أهمية حماية المدارس وضمان بيئة آمنة للطلاب والأطفال لتحقيق تعليمهم.
Children are our future. Better education means a better future. We must unite to protect our future.
The international system is the very system that really can work and help and assist everybody, but today, the children's in education.
La educación es la mejor arma para luchar contra la guerra, la violencia y la exclusión. Trabajemos juntos. Unite to protect.
Thanks to all those leaders for speaking out in a united voice about the importance of education. And thank you so much to the organizers of this important event for allowing me the privilege of moderating this very important discussion today. It's now time for our second panel, and it's my pleasure to introduce our next moderator, the award-winning journalist and correspondent for Doha Debates, Nelufar Hedayat. Over to you, Nelufar.
Thank you, Nick. And hello, everyone. What an absolutely impressive first panel. Watching it go out live in that way, I am energized and just filled with so much hope and ambition, knowing that there is so much to be achieved. Now, the presence of so many global leaders and young people shows us the urgency of protecting education from all forms of attack. In our first panel, we discussed the big picture, framing the global governance context and agreeing on what can and should be done, with some breaking news there as well. In the second panel, we'll continue to hear from state representatives, grassroots organizations, policymakers, and young people who possess a rich set of practical experiences and, of course, vital on-the-ground frontline ways of formulating responses, protecting education from attack. We'll also hear about what works, what policies and practices have already created an impact for thousands of students because the work has started. How will it protect educators, schools, and communities we all live in? The work of these incredible leaders provides us with a template and best practices that we can all put to use so that we better protect education from attack. The result is going to be lasting, positive change for the families, the communities, and entire countries who are joining in this fight to protect education. And they're doing it every single day. The work does not stop. Now, to help our discussion in this second panel, our first presenter is Miss Virginia Gumber, Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict. Her mandate, which includes attacks on schools, covers the 6 grave violations of international law against children. Ms. Gamba will share an overview of the legal framework and policy mechanisms that are vital to protecting children against grievous harm. She's going to dig into the early warnings and prevention steps regionally, but also locally, to safeguard children's lives in conditions of armed conflict. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you, Ms. Gamba. Hello.
Hello, how are you? I wish I had the time, 3 hours, to discuss all the items you would like to get from me, but you have 3 minutes, and that's what I will give you. I really would like to thank the State of Qatar, Education Above All, UNESCO and UNICEF for co-organizing together with my office this event of today. So today's second International Day in the protection of education from attack takes place as we enter the year marking the 25th anniversary of the Children and Armed Conflict Mandate, and the office I have the honor to lead. It is a fitting moment to remind the international community.
Gamba?
Yes.
May I just put one thing to you, just to help frame your remarks, because I know you have them prepared, but I want to frame them for our audience who might need a little bit of guidance. Now, protecting education, Ms. Gamba, at a regional and local level requires conditions, law enforcement, advocacy, and on-the-ground intervention, as you well know. I want to know from you, can you describe the most important and the most effective mechanisms and tools that can protect education so that we may learn from your experience? Please go on.
The most important tool to protect education is to put it in your mind. As long as there is no political will or even thinking that education is important, then education will continue to be attacked. So we do have legal frameworks. We have Security Council resolutions on all 6 grave violations against children, which include not just Security Council Resolution 1998 that penalizes, that asks for perpetrators to be named, that engage in any attack on schools and hospitals. That's Security Council Resolution 1998. But we also have Security Council Resolution 2143 that also urges all parties to armed conflict to refrain from actions to impede children's access to education, and that includes the military use of schools. So we do have 2427, Security Council Resolution of 2018, that asks us all to prevent violations against children, and more specifically to protect the rights of girls to equal access to education. So we do have Security Council legally binding resolutions. We also have conventions. Many have been spoken to in the previous panel. But may I mention the Convention on the Rights of the Child, all its optional protocols, including the optional protocols on the better way to protect children from engaging in armed conflict. So we do have the legal frameworks. So in a way, it's true. What we need is to implement this and to make it true. And this can be done through 2 processes. The first process is the one that you've also heard, where member states get together. A good example is the State of Qatar's initiative on this International Day to remind us every year of the need to protect schools from attack, education from attacks. But another very good one is the Safe Schools Declaration Initiative, which already has 111 signatories. And some countries, now we have to implement. So, for example, Mali and Nigeria have already domesticated this Safe Schools Declaration into their national policy. So you ask me, what can be done in practical issues? Well, there are 3 things that could be done, frankly. The first thing that has to be done is that every government that believes in their mind, as well as in their commitment, that children should be given an education and that education should benefit them in any non-discriminatory way. You cannot just choose who will get educated and who not. It's girls and boys, non-discriminated, and it's everybody up to 18, absolutely. And if they want to continue studying beyond 18, there's also frameworks that would protect that type of education. So we have the legal frameworks. What we need to do is to domesticate it into national legislation. Some countries are doing this, but other countries are going further. And this is where I think what you're asking me is a practical issue. It was also discussed by Karim, my friend from the ICC, where you have to criminalize the 6 grave violations against children, but specifically, one of them is attacks on schools, and these attacks on schools and education must be criminalized so that people can be held accountable, not just internationally, but nationally, where it is even more important. So what other things could be done? Well, for example, peace ultimately is the one thing that will always protect schools, because once you have peace in any post-conflict reconstruction, you always start with hospitals and schools. You need to provide the future to your people. So this is, the variable. And I think what one has to understand is that peace is difficult to obtain. It is a result of dialogue, reconciliation, compromise, negotiations. And very often, these compromises, dialogues, and peaceful processes ignore the existence of children. So they are made more political, more territorial, more leading to security issues, but they do not put at the heart of that commitment the need to pan out, do a frame, do a map of what should be the expectations of the peace process for children, and commit all parties that sign such a peace process, or all parties that engage in a new government that is inclusive, that is democratic, whatever system that they have, has to include a future for the children that is based upon the right to non-discrimination in the education that these children will receive, all the way to high school minimally. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the comment. And to your point, we have the framework. The hard work has begun. It's about making sure, as Ms. Gamba said, that those are implemented. Thank you for your commitment, Ms. Gamba, and the action that you're taking to ensure that children have safe access to education, and highlighting that data is crucial for all solutions. Accountability, prevention of attacks, response when they do happen, and the support of victims. And thank you especially for your specific emphasis on protecting the human rights to learn and be educated, not just for young girls, but young boys as well. As a journalist myself, I've documented and I've traveled to Pakistan, Nigeria, El Salvador, and many, many more places, and see for myself the value and the need and the benefit of when the legal framework is implemented. The results are smiling faces and young children with brighter futures, which is exactly why we're here today. Speaking of Nigeria, our next guest is His Excellency Ambassador Gabriel Aduda, Permanent Secretary and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As host of the 4th Safe Schools Declaration Conference in October, Nigeria will play a leading role in mobilizing a global response. Welcome, Ambassador Aduda. It's good to see you. Before we hear your remarks, let me frame the context of your upcoming remarks. Your Excellency, as the host of the 4th Safe Schools Declaration Conference next month, Nigeria has a very important opportunity to demonstrate leadership in the global response to stop school attacks. More specifically, people will be looking at you, Your Excellency, and your country to advance evidence-based approaches on accountability, advocacy, prevention, and response to attacks on education. What can we expect at the conference? What will you be championing?
Thank you so very much, Your Excellencies, and to the presenter and moderator. Your question actually comes up in 2 forms. One is how we intend to prioritize safety for safe schools, and how do we prevent attacks on schools or kidnapping of school children, which, as we all know, Nigeria has been bedeviled with in recent times. Let me take them one after the other. In response to the very first issue, Nigeria is already prioritizing integration of safe schools and the protection of education into our national policies. It is against this backdrop that Nigeria launched the Safe School Initiative in 2014 at the World Economic Forum on Africa held in Abuja in response to the growing number of attacks on the rights to education, including the kidnapping of more than 200 schoolgirls from government secondary schools, Chibok in Borno State, and several others that have happened in recent times. Given the pride of place and the high priority the government of Nigeria accords to education, the Safe School Initiative has been a major step in driving global action to protect the learning environment. We will continue to strive to attract more countries into the coalition as it enables the transformation of school attacks from social problems to policy actions. It was in this spirit that Nigeria co-sponsored the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 74275, proclaiming September 9th every year as the International Day to Protect Education from Attack. It is also quite instructive that the resolution was adopted under Nigeria's presidency of the United Nations General Assembly during the 74th session. It will be recalled, in addition, that Nigeria led the important efforts to get the General Assembly to declare 24th January of every year International Day of Education, Resolution 73/25 in 2018, consistent with our country's valuation of education. Similarly, to ensure a safe and secure learning environment, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Muhammad Buhari, signed the Safe Schools Declaration ratification document in December 2019. As you know, Nigeria was part of the first group of 37 countries that endorsed the Safe Schools Declaration since 2015. Permit me to use this opportunity on behalf of the government of Nigeria and our co-hosts to invite all of you to the 4th International Conference on Safe Schools Declaration, holding in Abuja, Nigeria, from 25th to 27th October 2021. Nigeria will be the first country in Africa to host this conference as we speak and we seek to share our experience in protecting education from attack, as well as learn from the experiences of other countries facing similar challenges. I believe that the conference will be a fertile platform to articulate strategies and solutions for the future. Nigeria underscores the need to build policies around problems associated with attack on education. We recognize that policies form the rallying point for public interest and commitment to address the problem. Policies also give impetus for political will and political action. In the same vein, data can only be collected and analyzed systematically if we have policy as the guide. We cannot plan for the future without data. Hence, the complementary functions of policy and data have been vital in the rollout of both the Safe Schools Initiative and Safe School Declaration in Nigeria. In this regard, I am happy to inform that the National Council on Education, the highest decision-making body on education in Nigeria, on the 13th of August 2021, adopted the National Policy on Safety, Security, and Violence-Free Schools in Nigeria. In framing this policy to entrench the Safe Schools Declaration guidelines across Nigeria, we have been fortunate to benefit from the goodwill and partnerships of friendly countries and corporate organizations. On this note, let me seize this moment to express Nigeria's appreciation for the support of the UN through its multi-donor funding. This is also important, as policies can only be successful with the collaboration of critical stakeholders in terms of capacity and finance. Having elaborated on the aspect of prioritization, let me now focus very briefly, as I round off, our attention on the issue of prevention of attack or kidnapping. To achieve this, it is important that we enact specific international and domestic laws to protect education from attack. We all know that the laws give scope.
Ambassador
Can you hear me?
Aduda, Ambassador Aduda, I'm being told by our technical team that as this is live and you are there with us in Nigeria, unfortunately the connection is failing, but I believe and I trust me and the audience have a sense of your commitment. And may I just commend you for I've been to Nigeria. I know exactly how committed Nigeria is to making sure all of her girls and her boys and her women and her men are educated. May I just commend you as taking that initiative, being the first in Africa to take on the challenge and carry that torch, hopefully into the life of every Nigerian citizen that deserves it. I thank you, Ambassador Aduda, for all you and the Nigerian government are doing to focus the world's attention on school attacks and kidnappings. We look forward to hearing more about the issue at the upcoming Safe Schools Declaration Conference in October from Nigeria. Thank you again for your contributions. Joining us next is Mrs. Helen Grant, Member of the British Parliament and the UK Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Girls' Education. Mrs. Grant has well-developed insights into the current state of schooling for girls, especially in my birthland of Afghanistan, where I was born and where I did not have an opportunity to get an education. And more importantly, now she's going to give us her remarks on how we can best make sure that aid and any resources is given in a way that serves the end users, that is, those students. Welcome, Mrs. Grant. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much indeed, Nella, and thank you, Education Above All, for inviting me to be with you today.
Now you come to this topic with considerable personal experience. You've been there, you've seen it, and you've worked to make education safe and accessible on behalf of the UK government. Can you tell us what the UK is doing to protect education and incorporate this issue into peacemaking initiatives for long-lasting understanding and implementation of saving and protecting schools from attack? Over to you.
Well, thank you again. I'm hugely honoured to be the UK Prime Minister's Special Envoy for girls' education. My role very much is to globally champion his message that providing every girl on the planet with 12 years of quality education is one of the best ways of tackling many of the major issues facing the world today. And I think that this is especially true when education is under attack. Education is a human right, and it's also key in building stable communities, greater understanding, and equality of opportunity. And yet, between 2019, more than 11,000 attacks on education, harming 22,000 students and educators in 92 different countries. In countries like Yemen, there was an average of one attack on education reported each day. We also know that attacks on education have a disproportionate impact on girls. Girls who live in conflict zones are 2.5 times more likely to be out of school than those who do not. Out-of-school girls are more at risk of violence, sexual violence, forced marriage, early marriage, human trafficking. Mass school closures due to COVID-19 have only made things so much worse. And all of this, tragically, is leading to a very real risk of a lost generation of girls. And we need to work very hard, and we need to work together to prevent this from happening. The UK is absolutely committed to supporting children affected by conflict and crisis back into school. Our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has put championing 12 years of quality education for every girl at the heart of the G7 presidency. This is allowing the transformative power of girls' education to get the priority and profile it needs, as well as the financial and political commitments. In July of this year, the UK co-hosted with Kenya the Global Education Summit in London. We raised a landmark $4 billion, which included our own pledge of £430 million for the global partnership. This will help up to 175 million children by 2025. We're very proud to be the Global Partnership's leading bilateral donor, where approximately 75% of its funds goes to fragile and conflict-affected states. We're also the largest donor to Education Cannot Wait, which provides emergency and long-term support to ensure that education continues during times of crisis. The international community must work together to ensure that ECW is fully resourced. Predictable, multi-year funding is crucial for long-term planning and real action. The suffering of innocent children in Afghanistan is a clear example of the challenge that we face. And I'm very pleased the UK government has signed the Afghanistan joint statement on the situation of women and girls and their right to safety, security and dignity, including their right to education. The UK is also advocating for the universal endorsement of the Safe Schools Declaration. And we stand ready to support any new signatories to implement the declaration in any way that we possibly can. Evidence-based advocacy can greatly help and protect children in conflict zones. And this is why we're supporting the fantastic work of UNICEF, strengthen their monitoring and reporting mechanisms, and we would encourage other UN member states to do the same. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to virtually visit schoolgirls and teachers affected by conflict in Syria. I heard from them how education was providing a real lifeline, a space to see their friends, to build their self-confidence and self-esteem, and to learn the skills that they really do need to break the cycle of poverty in the places where they're living, and at the same time providing a sense of hope and optimism for the future. I was inspired by their dreams, the dreams of one girl hoping to become an architect to rebuild Syria, and another girl who wanted to be a social worker to protect children from violence. These girls are our future, and ensuring their right to safe, quality education is essential. The International Day to Protect Children from Attack and events like this is an important opportunity to take stock and redouble our efforts to protect the right of all children to education. I know the weight of the challenge is significant, but our ability to make changes in the world, if we work together, should never, ever be underestimated. Thank you very much.
Mrs. Grant, your commitment, your passion, and your putting the children at the heart and centre of any personal, governmental, and international efforts that you make is an inspiration for me to hear as a refugee myself, having fled Afghanistan because I did not have access to safe education, could not go to school until I was 7 years old. It is incredible to hear that you get that, you understand the personal nature, the very raw emotional nature of what we are talking about, because as you have stated, giving young women and young girls an opportunity to dream big and achieve big is critical. And thank you for discussing also the UK's commitment and setting an example by recognising the urgency of this issue and how necessary it is to commit significant effort and resource to protect education. Thank you for being with us. Our next guest is Her Excellency Geraldine Byrne-Nason, permanent representative of Ireland to the United Nations, co-chair of the Security Council Informal Expert Group on Women, Peace and Security. Ms. Nason has long been involved in the cause of education, especially that of women and girls. And I wanted to know how education contributes to building sustainable peace, because they are linked. What priorities does the UN and international community show, and how should they focus to foster education for all, especially women and girls' education?
Let me open by thanking today's host, Qatar, for your leadership on the International Day to Protect Education from Attack. Education is at the heart of Ireland's national story. Protecting the right to education, including in the most challenging contexts, is a major priority for us, including in our work on the Security Council. It's a sad recognition that this initiative is as urgent and necessary as ever. Attacks on schools have increased in the last year, even as educational institutions and schools globally are still reeling from the impacts of COVID-19. Military use of schools has continued, and conflicts become longer and more complex. We simply must continue to stand up and speak out. Schools are safe places for our children and for our youth. Schools must be protected. We are acutely aware that attacks on education do not affect everyone equally. When the right to education is denied by senseless attacks, children and youth from vulnerable groups, girls and young women and persons with disabilities, those who are often shut out from formal education, can find it more difficult to return and to complete their schooling. Shockingly, some are targeted simply for seeking an education. We have seen horrific attacks on girls' schools by those whose biggest fear, to paraphrase Malala, is a girl with a book. Ireland's Drive for Five initiative understood this at its core. Truth is that when a girl receives 12 years of free, quality education, the results can be revolutionary, not just for her, but for her entire society. Protecting education, particularly for the most vulnerable and for those caught up in conflict, is our common duty. This is a matter of human rights, a matter of sustainable development, and a matter of peace and security. All three of the UN's pillars add up to making this a shared imperative for the international community. As an elected member of the Security Council, Ireland now has the privilege of contributing to the Working Group on Children and Armed Conflict. Safeguarding education has been a major focus for us, particularly for girls, given the gendered impacts of attacks on education. As co-chair with Mexico of the Informal Expert Group on Women, Peace and Security, Ireland asserts the rights of women and girls across the agenda of the Security Council, including recently on Afghanistan. We have urged the Council to place the utmost priority on the rights of women and girls, including their right to participate in education, in all discussion and action on the future of Afghanistan. We must ensure that we recognise at the Council that education is a key component of sustainable peace. Let's be clear. Lasting peace is simply not possible without investment in schools and without upholding the right to education for all. The safeguarding of education today builds the next generation of leaders and peace builders of tomorrow. We know in Ireland what this means. We know it firsthand. We know that education is fundamental to reconciliation. In the Good Friday Agreement that brought peace to Northern Ireland, women negotiators secured language on the need for integrated education as a means of securing a culture of tolerance right throughout society. When the power of education is recognised and harnessed, it can transform individuals, transform communities, and transform societies. It knows no bounds. For me, protecting and promoting the education of adolescent girls is one of the most powerful things we can do together to change the world for the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now, to put Her Excellency's words into our modern day lives, you only need to look at the images coming out of Afghanistan with young girls standing holding placards demanding access to education. Now, not only would they not have the ability to write on those boards or to stand and organize, but they wouldn't have the confidence to stand up for their rights as human beings and citizens of this world if they hadn't already been educated. That is the power of what we are talking about. It's incredible, and I'm grateful for Her Excellency's remarks. Now, we're moving on to our next speaker. Ms. Lise Grande is the president of the United States Institute of Peace as our next speaker. Ms. Grande has a background in peacekeeping and peace operations. In Yemen, she was responsible for the United Nations humanitarian stabilization and development operations. And she's also experienced working in Afghanistan. Her first-hand knowledge of the connection between education and peacemaking are highly sought-after expertise on this issue for anyone who needs to know. Welcome, Ms. Grande. It's good to have you. Now, peace negotiations often involve national dialogue to help identify underlying grievances and address the root causes of conflict. But let's be clear. Friends don't make peace, people who have disagreements do. So, based on your expertise and experience, should education play a role in these national dialogues? And if you think so, what kind of role and what impact can including education have on peaceful political transformation? Over to you.
Nalafar, thank you. Before joining the United States Institute for Peace, I had the privilege of working for 25 years for the United Nations, and during that time I served in 12 conflicts and wars. As I look back on that experience, one of the striking things I saw is that no matter the circumstances and no matter the context, every family wants to protect their children's right to and access to education. As we all know, right now around the world, there are at least 35 million children who have been forced to flee from their homes and their communities because of conflict and war. Many of these children are unable to go to school, either because there are no schools to go to, or because they can't afford to go, or because they have to work, or because getting to the schools is too dangerous. The impact of denying children their education is enormous. Empirical evidence shows that taking education away from children and from families and from communities fuels frustration, creates feelings of injustice, drives disparities, particularly between genders and communities. It deepens inequities and substantially, demonstrably increases opportunities for extremism and radicalization and heightens the risk of continuing in future conflict. Protecting education during wars is hard, but it's necessary and above all, a shared moral responsibility. There are three things we can and should be doing. First, the aerial bombings and shelling that tragically kill children and destroy schools cannot be allowed. As my friend SRSG Dagamba highlighted in her comments earlier, attacking schools during conflict is one of the 6 grave violations against children, identified and condemned by the UN Security Council. We have to ensure that belligerents establish and adhere to no-strike lists, and that these belligerents are immediately and decisively sanctioned if they violate these. Second, funding and support for emergency education, including teacher salaries, during conflicts and wars should be one of the first things that is funded by the international community, and not, as is the case now, one of the last. Third, educators should be part of peace processes and national dialogues, and equal access to high-quality education should be a central plank of all peace talks and all national dialogues. The case for doing this is crystal clear. Studies from across the world show that well-managed inclusive education systems help to inoculate countries against conflict. Schools promote social cohesion and national unity. Education increases economic opportunity and earning potential and gives young people a sense of purpose and agency, which is key to protecting them from recruitment by violent extremists. Too often, education is left out of national dialogues and peace agreements, or it's relegated to an annex somewhere. This is a mistake. As the president of the U.S. Institute for Peace, allow us to say as emphatically as we can that inclusive education accessible to all is one of the smartest things we can do to make peace agreements and national dialogues better and last longer, and to make peace possible everywhere in the world. Nilüfer, allow me a very personal comment to you. I can't tell you what a privilege it is to be on this panel with you, an Afghan woman, and everything that you symbolize for the journey that you've taken. You're an inspiration to all of us.
Well, now I'm getting a little emotional, especially coming from you, Ms. Grande. Thank you very much. And I will just take on to say I am in contact every day, Lise, if I may, talking to young girls and young women who are smarter than me, more eloquent, brighter than I am, more ambitious, more capable, more deserving than I am. And every day they say, all we want is peace where we are. We do not all want to leave. We want to build a better Afghanistan. And to share space with you and hear your verbose and virulent comments just makes it all feel quite real, and you have disarmed me. Lise, thank you for your comments and for all the work that you do, and for a career of working for peace in the most challenging situations around the world. Moving on, many of us know our last presenter on this panel as one of the great American actors of our time. But Mr. Forrest Whitaker is also a long-standing champion for global peace, youth development and economic empowerment. He's the founder and the CEO of the Whitaker Peace and Development Initiative, or WPDI. He has personal experience in peace-building efforts with young people around the whole world and is a UNESCO Special Envoy for Peace and Reconciliation. Through his foundation, he has developed the Youth Peacemakers Network, a global peace-building social network with hubs in South Sudan, South Africa, Uganda, the United States, and Mexico. And we're grateful to have Mr. Whitaker's insight on this.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to address you today as we observe the second edition of International Day to Protect Education from Attack. I would like to thank the organizers of this event for their dedication to raising awareness about issues that deserve universal attention. Education is at the core of the inclusion principle inscribed in the Sustainable Development Goals, which tells us to leave no one behind. While schools should be treated as safe havens, while students and their teachers should be spared from harm, we still live in a world where education is targeted, where schools are bombed even as pupils and professors sit in their classrooms, where children are abducted by armed groups, and where teachers fear being assassinated by fanatics. Other forms of attack on education may be less tangible, but are just as detrimental for the future of children and their communities. Through my foundation, the Whitaker Peace and Development Initiative, I have been and have seen firsthand how child soldiers suffer from insidious attacks on their right to education. By being forcibly enlisted, they're forced out of schools, and even after they've been rescued, these youths are often deprived of learning opportunities because of the stigma and trauma they carry from their time in battle. As UNESCO Special Envoy for Peace and Reconciliation, I believe that education systems in these places and beyond must be more inclusive. They need to ensure genuine and long-term reintegration for child soldiers, as well as children and youth affected by other forms of conflict and violence. This is necessary around the world, that the gang-ridden urban areas in which WPDI works, such as Tijuana, Mexico, or Cape Town, South Africa. Education is also under attack when children and young people are forcibly displaced from their homes. It's very telling that millions of child refugees do not attend middle school. Not only 1% of young refugees attended university, or nearly 1/3 of global youth do. WPDI is active on the ground in conflict and violence-affected areas, places to respond to such challenges. We have a scholarship program in Uganda's Kiryondongo refugee settlement, as well as a partnership with Princeton University that prepares young refugees, some of them former child soldiers, for academic readiness. This partnership is a good illustration of how educational institutions can contribute to reintegration and inclusion for children affected by conflict. Indeed, our main goal is to help communities regain their capacity for resilience by providing young women and men with opportunities to become drivers of transformative change. Too often, though, young women and men from areas of conflict are solely viewed as either victims or perpetrators of violence. They're seen as a problem for their community. In contrast, we choose to treat them as assets, as a solution to the problems of their community. To enact this vision, I place education at the center of WPDI's programs. We train young people, including former child soldiers and refugees, in conflict resolution and entrepreneurship. Then we mobilize them to not only conduct mediation processes and create businesses, but to also teach conflict resolution to local leaders and bring business skills to other youth and vulnerable women. In the South Sudan, for instance, we work with UNESCO and the UN Women to have our youth go into remote areas and promote the spread of the National Peace Agreement. Working closely with education above all, we're currently implementing a project through which children of over 260 schools within South Sudan and Uganda will be mentored by our youth. They'll run grassroots advocacy campaigns on human rights, including the right to education. Encouraging the participation of young people in such peace-building processes is one of the best approaches to championing long-term peace and sustainable development. This position was recognized in 2015 by the Security Council through its Resolution 2225 on youth, peace, and security. This certainly is a global concern, as the UN has suggested that 600 million youth live in conflict and violence-affected countries and territories. From our perspective at WPDI, it's critical to have even wider support behind the youth, peace, and security agenda. As an organization that empowers young people on the ground, it can make an immense difference if governments and international organizations back our work and assist in the mobilization of resources to create grassroots movements in conflict-affected places, which will contribute to protecting education under attack, improving security conditions, and fostering sustainable development for all. Thank you for your attention.
Our thanks to Academy Award winner Forest Whitaker for shedding light on the crucial role that education plays in peace building in order to ensure prosperous societies. Now, we've just heard from Mr. Whitaker that young people need to be at the heart of all of our efforts, and we've heard it again and again in the second panel. They need to be there to develop solutions to the problems of attacks on education, to protect education and to build sustainable peace. They need to be there now more than ever. Now we'll have the opportunity to hear from one of those young people. Let us turn our attention to Palestine, a place that has experienced large-scale attacks on schools and disruption to education, particularly in the past year. We're joined today by Issa Qaraeen, who is an 18-year-old Palestinian student. I want to welcome Issa, and I want to ask what should be done to ensure everyone's education is protected, and what her message is to world leaders watching.
My name is Issa Qaraeen. I'm 18 years old and from Palestine. Poverty and lack of resources, indeed, hindered access to education and the quality of learning in Palestine. There is, however, also the added challenge of accessing education in an environment that's sometimes very unsafe. This can impact our ability to claim our right to education. In Palestine, like other conflicted affected areas, our lives as students will contain obstacles and sad surprises. For example, imagine preparing for your most important final exams, but suddenly your city is under bombardment through no fault of your own. That's exactly what happened to students in the Gaza Strip about 4 months ago. When students in the West Bank need to cross checkpoints to get to schools, there is a little they can do to protect themselves from clashes that break out, from harassment at checkpoints, and searching of school backpacks, which inevitably make them late for classes. Even when students reach school, the danger does not always end. Schools in the West Bank have suffered from tear gas attacks, and even incursions into school buildings have been reported. Despite all the challenges that are faced while trying to get an education, however, we always dream of a better future and quality job. It is important that we remain hopeful and look forward to a time when accessing education is a safe activity, and all children, no matter where they live, have easy access to school. Finally, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the young Palestinians.
Thank you, Issa Qaraeen. And just imagine the situation and the picture he was painting for us with those words. And thank you for your message and sharing your experiences with us. We must indeed ensure that each and every person has the ability to safely access their education without fear of attack. So far, we've heard from those who are closest to the conflict, for those who are leading the global response to safeguard education from attack. We've discussed the critical role of education in building sustainable peace and bringing about recovery when attacks are made. The panelists have emphasized the need for equitable and inclusive education for all, irrespective of gender, religious beliefs, legal status, or socioeconomic background. This is a critical point to promote post-conflict recovery, reduce the likelihood of conflict, and to nurture a culture of sustainable peace. Putting it simply, where peace is being negotiated, young people and women must be at the table. This is an issue that we'll hear much more about in the upcoming high-level global conference on youth inclusion and peace processes early next year. We also heard about best practices for protecting education from those with on-the-ground experiences in some of the world's most affected regions and those trying to go to school in the middle of attacks. It's becoming clear that to stop attacks on education, we must report attacks, engage communities, and respond to victims of violence. And only by all of us, local governments, communities, researchers, and journalists like me, uniting to protect education, can we make this change? I will see you next in panel 3, where we will continue the conversation. Welcome back. Now, whilst keeping education safe and accessible for all is fundamentally a human challenge, the digital world also has a crucial role to play. And these wonderful guests that I'm going to have in a moment are going to explain to us why digital access and data is power. Whether it's gathered on the ground by individuals or by technology, data is a decisive tool in the struggle to protect education. And in this, our third panel, you are going to hear the amazing, breathtaking, and necessary advances that have been made since I last spoke to you last year. It can record the experiences of students, teachers, and schools across a country, region, and provide coherent, compelling insight. It can provide irrefutable evidence of human rights violations and criminal prosecutions. And by using artificial intelligence, we can now gather and analyze valuable information from thousands of individual sources to provide a detailed picture of what's happening within a country or a region. And we can do it almost as it's happening. Incredible stuff, I know. And that drives appropriate responses to specific needs and situations and allows us to be not only reactive, but responsive. Finally, data provides us with a true, accurate record that can inform, inspire, and mobilize people to further the cause of safe education and, critically, hold accountable those who commit crimes. In this, our final panel, we're going to hear from those playing a cutting edge and crucial role, harnessing the power of data to protect education. Now, our first panelist is Nada Al-Nashif, the United Nations Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights. Ms. Al-Nashif previously served as Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences at UNESCO. She led a data-focused portfolio that mobilized knowledge for inclusive, just and sustainable societies. And she's been at the forefront of using data-backed insight to address some of the world's most pressing issues. And we are pleased to have her insight.
Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused the largest ever global disruption of education, a fundamental human right in itself, which is also critical for the realization of all other human rights. School closures have affected over 1 billion students, and the pandemic has increased the vulnerability of children in conflict zones in particular. Around the world, conflicts and violence continue to keep millions of children out of school, despite the fact that it is in these very contexts where the right to education needs to be respected, protected, and fulfilled the most. We know that preventing and mitigating attacks on education and holding those perpetrators accountable is crucial, even as we know that attacks continue to be severely underreported. This requires that these attacks are investigated with quality disaggregated data collected, and that early warning systems and risk prevention measures are established in order to alleviate the impact of attacks on students and staff in schools and universities. An example of this work comes from our office and the UN Assistance Mission for Iraq, which conducted extensive community-level consultations between 2018 and 2020 to monitor and better understand the challenges experienced by girls in accessing education in conflict-affected areas in Iraq that were previously under ISIS control. The first-hand data and evidence collected not only enabled us to better understand the multiple challenges faced by girls, they also contributed to giving voice to those affected girls and young women in order that they can claim their rights, ensuring the credibility and practicality of the recommendations. Other UN human rights country presences, as well as the independent experts and commissions of inquiry established by the Human Rights Council, regularly monitor and report on the impact of conflicts and violence on the right to education, among other human rights. And we are bolstering country-level actions to protect economic and social rights under a surge initiative through context-specific advice on critical macroeconomic policies to protect, prioritize, and expand budgets and resources for education, health, and social protection. In this regard, the work of the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack on the Global Data System and the Toolkit on Collecting and Analyzing Data on Attacks are very important. By systematizing data collection and analysis, governments and partners can better plan and implement their targeted support towards the implementation of the Safe Schools Declaration and other commitments. We are very hopeful that our collective efforts can indeed bolster accountability and secure concrete solutions for millions of children and youth to access quality education in conflict-affected areas. And in this regard, I am also pleased to note that our office, in partnership with Education Above All and Silatech, is undertaking a joint project to develop a toolkit on the human rights of youth, including on the right to education, with and for young people. We look forward to working with you all in this important endeavor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nada Al-Nashif, for emphasizing the significant role that data plays for the protection and prevention of attacks on education. Our co-organizers, EAA and UNESCO, are working in partnership along with COBO, a Harvard-based organization, to apply cutting-edge humanitarian technology to strengthen our systems for data collection. Let's watch a video now that shows why this is important to everyone. The United Nations decision makers, grassroots organizers, youth, and journalists like me. Let's take a look.
And youth in the millions are being deprived of their right to education because of conflict and war. With no access to learning and to classrooms, students and teachers can be exposed to death, sexual violence, abduction. Children are being targeted for recruitment by armed groups. To understand where, why, and how these attacks happen, we need more and better information to help us make the right decisions to protect education. We need consistent, reliable, up-to-date data that can be analyzed in depth and to make informed decisions. We have the tools to monitor and report attacks on education, but we need more. We need to strengthen our systems to gather information, and we need to share the most relevant data in real time. We need a system that will ultimately act as a catalyst for change, and is the product of a dynamic partnership by stakeholders such as the United Nations, NGOs, universities, human rights groups, researchers, and journalists. A system that can record incidents using the most up-to-date technology and then compile news reports, statistical studies, and analysis, and store this information securely. Compiled over time, such consolidated and credible data will help us fill the gap in the current data landscape. Equipped with evidence and data, a tool like this can actively support and empower advocacy, secure vital resources, and develop strategies for prevention, response, and support for victims. The data will empower us to hold perpetrators of attacks on education accountable, end attacks on education, and uphold every person's right to education and to an equal chance at a bright future. EAA, COBO, and UNESCO are working in partnership to strengthen the ability to collect data on attacks on education. Let's unite to protect education.
That video really shows how improving and coordinating global data collection in real time will create a set of tools to help prevent attacks on education going forward. It really was a powerful video for us to understand the crux of what we're trying to do with data here. Now, our next panelist has dedicated her life to safeguarding quality education. Ms. Maki Katsuno-Hayashikawa is UNESCO's Director of the Division for Education 2030. She has more than 20 years of development expertise and experience in education, early childhood care, and education and gender. 15 years of her work are in the Asia-Pacific region with UNESCO, UNICEF, and the Japan International Cooperation Agency. Welcome to our panel.
Thank you very much,
Ms. Katsuno-Hayashikawa, we have just heard exciting news about the data project, which is an outcome of a partnership between EAA, UNESCO, and COBO. As the UNESCO Director leading on education to make sure that we have timely, accurate data on attacks on education, can you tell us how UNESCO envisions its role in improving data and monitoring of attacks on education towards meeting the Education 2030 agenda? Over to you.
Thank you, Nelly, for the question. Well, first, allow me to congratulate and thank you, our co-organizers, the State of Qatar, Education Above All, UNICEF, the Secretary General Special Representative for Children Armed Conflict, and the Global Coalition, of course, for organizing this high-level event. And also thank you very much for inviting UNESCO to join this high-level technical discussion to contribute to the already rich messages we have already heard. And wonderful video to start off my part of the presentation here. So, Nerfa, in responding to your question, I would like to highlight our current collaboration with EAA, of course, under which UNESCO's role is to improve the standards and methodology of the production, monitoring, and reporting of the data on attacks on education. As a UN specialized agency, our focus is on methodological and data validation enhancements, which will allow us to improve data quality and data confidence and increase the actual use of attacks on education, which could further contribute to improving monitoring of crises to enable timely response to attacks, to improve better and more accurate data on attacks on education that aids active recovery from crisis and reduces school disruptions for the most vulnerable children, and to inform and influence policies to aid better planning, preparedness, and prevention of future attacks on education. This work directly contributes to UNESCO's data-driven and evidence-informed approach to meeting the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to leave no one behind, which, as we all know, is the core commitment of SDG 4 on ensuring inclusive, equitable, quality education for all. It also builds on UNESCO's long-standing work in the context of emergencies and protracted crises, optimizes the strength of our sector-wide mandates and institutions to support the needs of member states, and leverages our global convening power as the lead agency in coordinating and monitoring the SDG 4 Education 2030 Agenda. This partnership we have now forged again with EAA specifically aligns and complements UNESCO's forthcoming global data portal on education emergencies, which is a platform to enable better coordination and standardization in the production and dissemination of education emergency indicators and data, including attacks on education. UNESCO's strategic position as co-chair of the Technical Cooperation Group that advises member states on indicator development for SDG 4 monitoring, and of the newly formed INEE Data Reference Group on Education Emergencies, also provide us with this unique opportunity to advance and sustain efforts in data standardization, methodological enhancements, and linkages with SDG 4 monitoring overall. Now, advocating, generating, and using better data evidence for monitoring, policy formulation, decision-making, and particularly for financing, and to advance and achieve SDG 4 is a priority concern for UNESCO. We are currently enhancing and refining the reformed global cooperation mechanism, which was endorsed at the Global Education meeting held in July this year, under which I believe increased emphasis will be needed to be placed on better data and evidence for attacks on education, with particular attention to addressing the needs of the most vulnerable children affected by crisis. As if we don't do that, we won't fulfill our commitments in the remaining years to 2030 and ensuring the full coverage of SDG 4 indicator, which includes 4.8.3 on protecting schools under attack. To this end, the new partnership with Education Above All and COBO is absolutely critical and timely, and I wish to express appreciation to our partners and confirm UNESCO's commitment, and also to request the collaboration of the broader partners to make this new initiative a successful one to protect the right to education for all children, youth, and adults, so that we can advance and achieve SDG 4 by 2030 for all, where all means all. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you so much for those comments, Ms. Katsuno-Hayashikawa and UNESCO, for your leadership in improving data and monitoring of attacks. I mean, we're talking about data here, and sometimes it can seem as though this part is perhaps harder or less visible, and it is so important to have people such as yourself come in on board and show us the sheer amount of work that needs to go into making sure that we achieve the high level goals we set ourselves. So I'm grateful to you, and I'm grateful for your commitment to improving data and monitoring of attacks on education so we can achieve the Education 2030 agenda for every child and young person. Thank you. I mentioned at the beginning of this panel the emerging importance of artificial intelligence and machine learning and how it's a game changer in the fight to protect education from attack. Our next panelist is a leader in this field, and his organization undertook a project that uses AI to gather social media reports about education, security, and attacks. Ahmad Magarmed is founder and executive director of the Qatar Computing Research Institute. Dr. El Magarmed joined the institute after serving as chief scientist at Hewlett-Packard and working as professor of computer science at Purdue University. Welcome, Doctor. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. Good morning. Today I'll present...
Qatar Computing Research Institute has developed the artificial intelligence for disaster response technology for humanitarian aid, which you are involved with. How are non-traditional data sources, Doctor, for example, social media, proving useful for humanitarian responses? And further, what role can artificial intelligence play in safeguarding education? Finally, I know this is a big question, but I know you're going to answer it well. What are the strengths and the limitations or risks compared to traditional data collection? Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning. I will present work done by Mohamed from QCRI on monitoring different forms of attacks on education, such as school destruction, killing, abduction, and harassment of students and teachers is important. However, traditional methods miss many instances of education insecurities. In the Qatar Computing Research Institute, we joined hands with Education Above All and United Nations OSHA in 2019 to address data scarcity through the use of artificial intelligence and non-traditional data sources such as social media. So our flagship system, AIDER, was trained in partnership with EAA and OSHA experts to analyze social media reports in real time. So our preliminary analysis revealed that harassment of students, especially females, is the most reported issue on social media. In some cases, victims committed suicide after repeated harassment. In recent months, there was a surge in school destruction and child abduction incidents. In Myanmar, for example, especially after the military coup earlier this year. Physical torture by teachers is also a widely reported issue, which causes widespread fear among students. Such incidents cause students to drop out of school or attend less often. The team further observed that many such harassment, abduction, and violence incidents, especially from remote areas, receive either no or limited coverage in traditional news media. Thus, we have an information scarcity, basically. So lastly, I want to emphasize that access to education is not only threatened by armed conflict, violence, and deliberate attacks. Natural disasters such as floods, earthquakes, wildfires also disrupt schooling. For instance, nearly 3,400 classrooms were destroyed and 300,000 children have had their education disrupted in Mozambique due to Cyclone Idai. Education is often not taken as a priority in such emergency responses. Understandably so, finding food, water, and shelter becomes the focus of emergency response. However, in my opinion, providing a safe learning environment and rebuilding schools should be taken equally as important to prevent long-lasting effort for education. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed Al-Maghamed, for your representation. It is exciting, Doctor, to see how AI can leverage social media. It can aggregate, analyze information from individuals who would otherwise, face it, they'd be isolated, disconnected, maybe even disregarded. And the way that transforms all of the information into powerful tool that we can use. Now, clearly, this is a tool that can empower entire communities and regions, and I'm grateful to you and the work that you are doing. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Our next panelist is Professor Michael van Rooyen. To name just a few of his titles and achievements, Dr. van Rooyen is Professor and Director of the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative at Harvard University and is a Director of COBO. Dr. van Rooyen has also worked as an emergency physician with numerous relief organizations in over 30 countries affected by war and disaster. It's great to have you with us, Dr. van Rooyen.
Thank you so much. It's really such a pleasure to be here. Hi. So wonderful to be here from Boston. We send our great thanks and regards and on this International Day to Protect Education from Attack, and my sincere thanks to the state of Qatar, UNICEF, UNESCO, EAA for their partnership with COBO and with HHI. And thank you, Ms. Henrietta, for your amazing work, actually. You're an inspiration, as was mentioned, and I think, the work that you do currently as an important voice for accountability and protection of civilians in conflict is really so important. So thank you.
Well, let me have the opportunity to hold you to account, and I'm grateful for your comments. Let's hold you to account for a moment. The Harvard Humanitarian Initiative is a leader in developing data-driven insight and responses to humanitarian crises. So COBO is one of the partners with EAA and UNESCO in the data project that we've just announced. How can the initiative and the knowledge you're developing help safeguard education during emergencies, because as we've just heard, in those type of situations, when you've got a cyclone, a flood, when you're being under attack by an armed gang, your first priority isn't education, but it should be very near there. Why? I hand the floor to you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd say one of our first priorities has to be data. In other words, to have a data-informed response, no matter the severity of the threat, a natural disaster or a crisis that's brought about by violence. We need data, and we need to find out the vulnerabilities of the population. And the threats to education are fundamental, and the threats to education are pernicious and dangerous. And so we are really dedicated to not only looking at data in all aspects of the way humanitarian emergencies play out, but also, and in particular in this case, in how they affect educational facilities. So first, the direct effects of violent effects on civilian schools and educational facilities is something we've been talking about throughout this conference, and is very important. We see that these escalate from violent conflicts and even disasters. Certainly the attacks in Afghanistan are only part of the world's problem as it relates to these major problems and attacks on educational facilities. This is only part of the issue, though, and I think that one of the things that we need to do with data is understand the nature of these attacks, to help hold people accountable, and to really quantify what's happening. But also the larger threats to education, I would say, take other forms: the deprivation of education of girls and women, the co-opting of education for extremism, and certainly the lack of even prioritizing education in both relief efforts, but also for displacement and entire generations that suffer displacement. We deprive institutions of proper resources, security, teachers, buildings, supplies, curricula, and access for all. This all has to be quantified. We have to understand it, that data actually matters, and that to measure not only the short-term very visible attacks on educational facilities, but also the longer term effects, and using tools like COBO to measure that, I think, are really important. Because these have not only a direct effect that we can see, the abduction of girls and students, the coercion of teachers, but also the massive ripple effects that affect millions. This conference has really emphasized a few points that data needs to be brought about to support. Education is fundamental to creating civil society. Education expands peace and promotes economic opportunity. Education reduces the gender gap and promotes gender equality, and builds tolerance and reduces racial disparities. And unless we are able to quantify that, we can't actually affect change. I'll just say, as a physician, I understand that healthcare is crucial, but healthcare is only half of the battle. By assuring the health of children, we then need to make sure that children and young adults get access to education, to reduce things like infant mortality, improving health literacy, improving family planning, reducing violence against women, and assure that women and girls participate in the future of governance of countries. We see this play out in the COVID epidemic, right? The lack of public health literacy leads to greater mortality, and that's not just in other areas around the world that are less industrialized. It's in every nation. Ignorance is deadly, and we know that, and we have to be able to measure and understand how we use data to drive our interventions. So we each have something important to contribute, and I would say that Harvard really wants to be a leader in contributing. Yes,
we keep saying this, Dr. Van Rooyen, educating women and girls. We should educate women and girls. You and I know, and those watching know what we mean. But I want to hear it from you. Why? Why should girls be more special? Why is it more important to educate women? Why should we create this seems to be a sexist sort of rule? What is critical about educating an 8, 9, 10, 15, 18-year-old girl that we all keep going on about? Why is it critical? Can I just give you a moment to answer that? I'm curious myself more than anything.
Yes, and I'd love to. And there's one particular case. The single proven greatest effect on infant mortality is the education of the mother. Single thing, that's it. Like everything else, no matter the education or the health capacity of a nation, the public health capacity, there's one single thing that is the most important to protecting an infant and reducing infant mortality, and that is the education of the mother. Now, that plays out in every other sector of society. And so if we want a civil society, if we want a public health infrastructure, if we want a place that is safe and allows appropriate governance, we have to preferentially educate women. So this is not all about educational equality. This is actually preferentially finding a way to educate women and girls to advance their place in society. If we don't do that, and if we don't focus on it, we're going to be missing.
I got it. Thank you, Dr. Qaraeen. It's great to hear your insight, and thank you again for answering that question so directly. It has to be preferential, because when we educate mothers, we essentially create civil society. I'm grateful for your time. Thank you. Our final speaker is Ms. Dia Nitschjauwen, Executive Director of the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack. She oversees management of all the coalition's operations and program implementations. A former child protection worker in Canada herself, she has over 15 years of experience working on children's rights and protection issues, including in emergency situations. Welcome. It is so glad to see you and to have you with us. You are welcome here. How can we then make sure that the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack does more to ensure that data on attacks on education is more timely and verifiable going forward? The work has started, but as I said, it needs to continue. How can governments make use of improved data to better protect education from attack? Ms. Dia, it's over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you today. So GCPA has an extensive database on attacks on education and military use of schools and universities, which we use to publish our Education Under Attack series, the next edition of which will be released in May next year. The data is derived from media reports, government, UN, and other development and humanitarian agency sources. But our data and our analysis really only as good as the data that we receive from these sources. So we spent a great deal of time and effort really encouraging them to regularly report on attacks on education, standardize their data collection so that the data can be compared and trends identified, and disaggregate the data by gender in particular, but also by school level and other criteria so that more detailed analysis is possible. GCP has recently developed a toolkit on collecting and analysing data on attacks on education, which provides practical guidance on gathering and reporting data on attacks to better enable analysis. And this toolkit also offers guidance on how to do this analysis to improve understanding of the scope and impact of attacks, which in turn can inform prevention and response plans and improve accountability measures, as we've discussed. GCP is conducting orientations with education clusters and others involved in collecting data on attacks on education to support them in utilising these methodologies in the toolkit. And we're also developing case studies using the toolkit to illustrate how the methodologies can improve collection and analysis of data and ultimately inform policy recommendations. For example, we just released a briefing paper on the impact of explosive weapons on attacks on education, which focused on Afghanistan, and that really drew on this database that we have. We're also holding trainings with journalists to impress upon them the importance of reporting on attacks on schools and universities and identifying when students and educators are killed or harmed by armed forces or groups, so that this violence can be recognised as attacks on education and counted. So our data will become more timely and reliable as more governments and organisations follow the methodologies in the toolkit to collect and analyse data and then share this widely. The more reliable and standardised the data is available, the more nuanced the analysis we can provide and more tailored recommendations we can also make on how to keep students and educators safe. You did ask about how governments can make use of this data to better protect education from attack. And really, the most effective, or one of the most effective ways and comprehensive ways that governments can better protect education is by endorsing and implementing the Safe Schools Declaration. And as you know, a core commitment within that is to strengthen monitoring and reporting of attacks on education. But robust data is really critical to implementing all the other commitments in the declaration as well, including assisting victims, facilitating the continuation of safe education during armed conflict, including by providing alternative education programs and rebuilding schools,
and of course ensuring accountability for perpetrators of attacks. So some countries are already taking action to strengthen their collection of data. For example, in Burkina Faso, the Ministry of Education is releasing education in emergencies data that includes information on attacks on schools. And in Ukraine, the Ministry of Education and Science is developing and implementing a mechanism for monitoring and informing on attacks on educational facilities. In Nigeria, in September last year, the Education in Emergencies Working Group completed a draft of the Safe Schools Declaration and the guidelines reporting and assessment forms for conflict areas. And these forms allow for the detailed and systematic collection of data on attacks on education and military use of schools, with the aim of facilitating school reopenings after attacks. But despite this progress, in many countries experiencing attacks on education, governments really require substantially more technical and financial support to strengthen their data systems. The Coalition's toolkit and the orientations we're doing provide some of this technical assistance, but much greater resources are needed to scale up this implementation so that timely and accurate data and analysis can take place and can really fully inform the implementation of the different commitments within the Safe Schools Declaration. This will facilitate a holistic and multi-dimensional approach critical to ending attacks on education and keeping militaries and armed groups out of schools. As you've heard already, on October 25th to 27th, Nigeria, along with Argentina, Norway, Spain, and the African Union Commission, as well as ourselves, GCPA, will be hosting the 4th International Conference on the Safe Schools Declaration. And this really will be an opportunity to share knowledge and experience in collecting and analysing data on attacks on education, which has already been said is really the foundation for strengthening protection for education from attack. So we very much hope to see you all there, and please register and attend. Thank you.
Perfect to time there, Ms. Najaouin, and thank you for sharing with us the best practices that states can employ to protect education from attack. I echo your sentiment to encourage all states to endorse and effectively implement the Safe Schools Declaration, and it's with good news that you brought us that many states are looking into it. Next month in Abuja, the conference is a great opportunity to highlight these issues. Now, in panel 2 and 3, we've seen the global consensus on the importance of zero tolerance for attacks on education and a shared determination to act. In particular, the support from lots of different stakeholders, including Nigeria, Ireland, the UK, Niger, all the way through to Qatar, as well as the EU, demonstrates that we have the global support to fight for change. That support is echoed by world leaders. Let's take a look. You're going to like this.
Una educación con enfoque de paz debe incluir la justicia, la igualdad, la solidaridad, la democracia, la libertad, el respeto a las diferencias, la diversidad cultural y sobre todo la transformación pacífica de las disputas, así como la prevención de los conflictos armados.
It is a right of our children and youth to enjoy their education. Through education, they are empowered to become active agents to build more just, peaceful, and prosperous society. Let's unite to protect education.
We should reaffirm that no effort will be spared to avert the danger of deliberate attacks or armed violence against teachers, students, and schools.
Join me in this global community effort to unite and to protect our children and our youth.
Our children's future is in our hand. Let us all unite to protect and save the future generations.
And the most important for a country, for the future, for a functioning welfare state, is to invest in its young people, both boys and girls.
Building peace and protection of children and youth to enjoy their right to safe, accessible, inclusive and equitable quality education have acquired special importance. So let's unite to protect education and build peace.
I say to all of you who have contributed in today's panel, to the amazing team that has put this show together, spent months doing so, to the hard work, every person on the field, every person in an office working the data and the paperwork, every leader, every person taking initiative to do something, may I say to you, thank you. And today is a day not only to take account and stock of the challenges ahead, but to, as you saw in that video, appreciate, respect, and hold hands and commit, as we have, to the future of protecting and safeguarding young people and their education. It's days like this where we can take a moment to celebrate all that we have achieved and take stock of what needs to happen going forward. It is just such an honor as ever to be part of a day like this with all of the stakeholders and all of the people that make today happen. And that's just coming from my heart. So I hope that's okay to say. It has been a fascinating panel on this third one on how technology and timely verifiable data can be put to good use by all of us, world leaders, academics, grassroots communities, youth, journalists, in our quest to protect education. We've heard of progress such as the EAA, UNESCO and COBO partnership that'll give us timely verifiable data on attacks on education. What is clear at the end of all of these three panels is that we've gathered world leaders, policymakers, academics, and young people here today, and we are all united in one powerful and inspiring message. Education is a priority, especially for the most marginalized. We are acting, and together we can stop all attacks on education and protect and repair when it does happen. I want to thank all our distinguished speakers, participants, as well as a special shout out to our young panelists who have joined us from South Sudan and Palestine. And I want to thank you, our global audience who've joined us on this live stream. Support us, connect with us, and spread our message using the hashtag #UniteToProtect. We need each and every person who has joined us today to remain active, engaged, mobilized, and hopefully after today feel empowered. We can all unite to protect and stop all attacks on education for all. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.